It's the battle of the Adidas shoes. Or is it? We're going to be comparing the Adios Pro 3 versus the Boston 12. How they compare, contrast, and complement one another. Let's begin. So before we get into the video, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're already subscribed, watching the content. Thanks so much, love you guys a lot. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Strava for all sorts of other updates and things like that. So without further ado, let's begin. Specs for both shoes up here. And we're just going to get right into it. No BS involved. I mean, it's hard to compare these particular shoes mostly because if you've followed or done just even a little bit of research and just like simply looking at both shoes, right? You can tell that one is clearly a race day shoe and one is going to be more of your all-around kind of daily trainer. Or is it, right? So we're going to try to break into a little bit more of the nuance between both and why one would be better than the other and why, as a training shoe, the Boston 12 and a few others are good complementary shoes to like the Adios Pro 3, right? Or the Adios Pro 3 in this case, right? So obviously, main things that are different between both shoes: the overall stack height and specs of the Adios Pro 3 involve a higher stack height, so there's more foam. The shoe is overall lighter, and the offset is slightly less than the Boston 12. But we mean it slightly. Like the Boston 12's offset is about like 7 millimeters at its peak, at its perfect shape, and it kind of gradually does lower as you put some more fatigue on the shoe and whatnot. And the Adios Pro 3 sits at about 6.5 at its kind of core, and then it could probably drop to, I guess, as low as 6 in most cases. So that's just something to be concerned about. Like, the numbers are about a 0.5 millimeter off, but as a runner, you'll probably notice, just like mathematically, you would just be like, well, the difference isn't that massive, right? It kind of is, and you will feel that difference. Like, the difference between 6.5 and 7 is obviously not as great as like 6 millimeters and 4 millimeters. You will feel that if your foot is, I would say, a little bit weaker than the normal runner's foot, whether it's because you've been running in carbon plate shoes or you're just not running as frequently, so you haven't built that strength in your feet in kind of a longer period of time, right? So let's answer one of the first questions that kind of comes to mind, right? Could the Boston 12 be in a scenario where it's your race day shoe over the Adios Pro 3? It depends, okay? I guess the things to consider is when you're let's just say you don't own the Adios Pro 3, then obviously like the Boston 12 will become your contender as a race day shoe in that kind of case. But like, what are your other options, right? Do you have like other branded race day shoes like the Vaporfly, the Alpha Fly from Nike? Do you have like the Metaspeed Sky? Do you have like the Hoka Carbon X? Like, those are the questions you would probably end up asking yourself. But if you really didn't have any other option, I would argue that this shoe will be good for pretty much any sort of distance you're looking to try to race, from the 5K to like the half marathon. It could probably even be a really good marathon shoe if you're used to doing your longer runs in this shoe. Just again, what you are trading in speed, you are trading in to bring in some comfort, as the Boston 12, relatively speaking, is going to be a more comfortable shoe than the Adios Pro 3. Now, if this was the Boston 11, you would have what I would argue about the same level of comfort as the Adios Pro 3. Like, both of those shoes are a little bit more streamlined in terms of their fit. The mesh uppers are just heat treated and have kind of a glue treatment that makes them a lot tighter on your foot, whereas the Boston 12 isn't necessarily as tight. It's a lot more loose and it gives you a more relaxed ride, but it does keep that consistency all the way across the board. And that's the one thing that both of these shoes share, is that while running in them, maybe it's just a feature of the carbon rods that are featured in both shoes, but the shoes, like, the speed doesn't vary too much if you choose to like slow down or kind of speed up. Like, it's going to remain consistent. And the example I mean by this is, like, if you're doing some kind of daily run and let's say your tempo or like MAF tone pace has you at about like 7:30, 7:45 per mile. I don't know, just making up numbers here, right? What you'll notice in like a 2, 3, 4 mile kind of window is that if terrain and conditions pending, you're gonna keep in about like a 4 to 5 second range of those miles every interval of the way, right? So like whenever I was doing any sort of training runs in the Boston 12 or the Adios Pro 3, where I was running out in Cary, Illinois, so that's kind of a little bit more hilly, and it's one of the places where I train on that race course, more or less. I could keep the pace at like 7:05 if I really wanted to. I could drop it to like 7:15 if there were a few hills. I could speed it up to 6:50 if there was a downhill. But like I could keep the shoe within this window without too many outlier pieces, whether it's like me trying to kick into the shoe a little bit more and getting a return that I wasn't used to that might fatigue me a little bit more. Like that sort of return is sort of important. Like that consistent return while you're running. That's sort of something I've realized with the Adidas product. And it's something I don't really see in like the Nike product, which isn't a bad thing. It's just you're trading in your speed for a little bit more of a consistent ride. And that's sort of what's happened when I'm using like the Adidas shoe, is that yeah, maybe my fitness isn't all great right now, but like I'm consistently running pretty clean intervals, which is good when it comes time to prepping for like a sub 3 hour marathon where, you know, you're going to run like 6:50 to 6:52 minute per mile consistently for 26.2 miles. Like, is that possible in an Adidas shoe? Totally. You can go a lot faster too, you know, granted, and however you want to do it. But if I wanted to run 6:52 and keep it perfectly average, like I could rely on my training in an Adidas Pro 3 or like a Boston 12 to kind of get to that position, right? So, other things to note, like obviously there's some visual pieces, of course, like the Continental rubber on this shoe, slightly thinner than what's going on the Boston 12. Boston 12 also has a little bit more of like that tread style, which gives you a little bit more grip if you're running like in the rain or something like that, rain, ice, snow, you name it. And like in this condition with like I think 350 plus miles, is like it looks great. Like there's some pieces where it's like kind of smoothened out from like a treadmill or something like that. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, like the shoe is still holding on pretty well. And it's like the foam hasn't burned into any of the foam inlets so far. So yeah, it's in a really good spot at this point. And then this shoe, which has been mostly done on, you know, outdoor gravel terrain and things like that, the foam is still in pretty good shape. It has a little bit of wear and tear in the places where it's open on the shoe. The rubber is not in a bad shape either, but it has clearly been a little bit more worn than like the Boston 12 at almost like 30% of that distance that I've put into Boston 12s. So those are sort of the comparison pieces I've talked about, like again, and contrasting the shoes as well, in terms of their specs and how they ride overall. In terms of complementing, like it should be obvious in this particular analysis that like the Boston 12 is a really good complementary shoe to the Pro 3 in terms of their specs being sort of similar in terms of ride, the materials they use, the energy return that's provided in the shoe, like the fundamental. It's not saying that like the Boston 12 will grant you the same kick that the Adios Pro 3 will. It should be assumed that based on the structural design and like the weight of this shoe, that you should have a better return in this one. And it's shown in at least my experience with the turnover in the shoe, where like the back kick is just super smooth, clean, and it's massive too. Whereas like in the Boston 12, it's a little bit less just because the shoe weighs a little bit more, but that turnover is still there. Like the shoe doesn't feel like I'm dragging it along, right? So the fundamentals are there. The shoe's a lot more comfortable and just supposed to give you small snippets of, I would say, the overall race ride that you'll experience if you use this shoe on race day instead of like the Boston 12. Now, in my particular case, like the Boston 12 is beginning to sunset in my lineup just because it's put in so much distance, and running in this shoe now with the way the foam has fatigued at this point is sometimes hurting my feet. So I use it not as frequently as my daily trainer right now, which is the Puma DV8 Nitro 2, I think it is, or it should be the 2. This shoe is a lot more comfortable. The return is, again, pretty okay, and just there's a lot more involved with testing the shoe on the easy daily training versus using it as like a directly complementary shoe to the Pro 3. But that being said, like both, you know, I've talked about this before on this channel, like the Boston 12 and the Puma DV8 Nitro kind of have their own niches in your daily lineup, where like this one's a little bit more comfortable, this one's a little bit more consistent, a little bit faster, but it depends what you're just kind of looking for overall in the long run, right? So with that being said, like that's where the Puma is kind of just sitting in this lineup. So it does complement well with the Adios Pro 3 as well. So just something to consider if you're not looking for a shoe that's a trainer that's in brand with your race shoe. Like there are options, of course. So overall, it should be obvious that in terms of your better race day shoe, it should be the Adios Pro 3. There are conditions where the Boston 12 will be, but if you have both shoes and you've used both shoes and you like both of them, it should be obvious that the Adios Pro 3 will be that race day shoe, but you know, there's outlier examples, right? In terms of your better daily trainer, the Boston 12 will have that longevity and more of that relaxed feel, a lot more comfort in your daily running. But if you're that guy who's like me and is not afraid of daily training in a race shoe, you know, go hog wild. You can daily train in this thing, but just beware of any sort of damage you put in that. The shoe's lifespan is not meant to have it be used as a daily trainer, but you sure could use it, right? So that being said, Boston 12 at this point, really great daily trainer. Good for any sort of easy runs, tempo sessions that I've always wanted to do. And at this point in time, it has done the job that I've always wanted it to do. It's just it's coming to a point where, as we approach 400 miles, the shoe is starting to fatigue in a way that it makes it a little bit trickier to run in, and it increases a little bit of the hurt that I would have otherwise experienced in a brand new pair of the Boston 12. So that's kind of where we sit. Better race day shoe, better daily trainer. If you guys got any questions, comments, concerns, disagreements, agreements, let me know, and we'll be happy to discuss. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. The shoe definitely just hit me in the nuts, but we're good. Promise. But that's the end of the video. Thanks so much. I'll see you guys in the next one.